The chamber is open and full of whispers.
The Hogwarts Express was 2 hours from King's Cross when the compartment door slid open and Draco Malfoy walked in alone. No Crabbe, no Goyle, no Pansy trailing behind him with her arms folded and her lip curled. Just Draco in his school robes, his prefect badge catching the gray afternoon light, his face arranged in an expression that Hermione Granger had spent 4 years learning to read. And this was not the expression she knew. Harry's hand moved before anyone spoke. Ron's followed a half-second later, both of them already gripping their wands beneath the folds of their robes. Hermione's fingers closed around hers in her pocket. Draco looked at the wands. He didn't reach for his own. He sat down. Not across from them. He chose the seat beside the window on their side of the compartment, the one that put his back to the corridor, the one that meant anyone walking past could see his face without him seeing theirs. It was either the most arrogant thing Hermione had ever seen him do, or it was something else entirely. And the fact that she was already separating those two possibilities told her something about the state of her own instincts that she immediately filed away to examine later. "Malfoy," Harry said, the word landing like a question with all the warmth of a closed door. Draco did not look at Harry. He looked at Hermione. "My father came home last night," he said. The compartment was very quiet. Outside, the countryside scrolled past in shades of gray and green, the sky low and bruised with the kind of summer rain that never quite arrived. Hermione did not move. She was watching the specific stillness in his jaw, the way he was holding himself, and she was thinking, already involuntarily against her own better judgment, that the boy in front of her had rehearsed this. Not the words, the posture. He had practiced sitting like someone who was not afraid. "I heard things," Draco continued, "and I'm going to tell you one thing, and then I'm leaving, and you're going to decide what to do with it." "You're going to tell us one thing," Ron repeated, his voice rising at the end in a way that indicated he was already constructing his objection. "Yes, and we're just supposed to." "You're supposed to listen." Draco's voice didn't rise. That was the thing about it, Hermione noted. It stayed exactly level, the way a table stays level when someone has been very deliberate about what they've placed on it. "That's all I'm asking. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to trust me. You just have to hear a name." Harry said, "We don't want anything from you." "I know." Draco finally looked at him then, and there was something brief and almost honest in it. "That's why I didn't ask." He reached into his robes and produced nothing. No parchment, no note, no object. Just his own voice, and the name of a ministry official. A mid-level functionary in the Department of Magical Transportation. Someone none of them had heard of. Someone entirely unremarkable. "He'll be moved into the Department of Magical Law Enforcement before the end of August," Draco said. "He won't have a title worth noticing. He'll just be there, filing reports, attending briefings." A pause. "He'll be the fourth." "The fourth what?" Harry said flatly. "That's all I'm telling you." Draco stood. He adjusted his robes with the precise, automatic gesture of someone who had been dressing under scrutiny his entire life. "Check it. When it's right, and it will be right, you'll know where this came from." He moved toward the door. "Why?" Hermione said. It was the first word she had spoken, and it came out without inflection, without the courtesy of a question mark, the way she asked questions in examinations when she already suspected the answer and simply wanted the space confirmed. Draco stopped with his hand on the doorframe. He didn't turn around. "Because I can," he said. "That's not a reason." A beat. The train rocked gently on the tracks. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He left. For the next 40 seconds, the compartment was filled with the sound of Ron being furious, which was a particular sound Hermione had catalogued extensively over 4 years. The rapid cadence of it, the way his voice went up and then down and then up again, the specific phrase, "complete rubbish," appearing at regular intervals. Harry said less. Harry was watching the corridor, his expression closed in the way it had been since the graveyard. Since the world had reorganized itself into something that left no room for the version of Draco Malfoy who was only ever a bully with money and bad opinions. Hermione said nothing. She was running it. The unremarkable name, the specific department, the precise qualifier, the fourth, which implied a series, a structure, a pre-existing count of 3 that someone had been keeping and had apparently decided to share. She was thinking about the way Draco had sat with his back to the corridor, which was not arrogance, she had decided. Arrogance didn't make you vulnerable on purpose. Arrogance performed confidence from a position of safety. What he had done was the opposite. He had put himself where he could be seen, and she could not be easily hexed without witnesses, and the only protection he had was the possibility that she was the kind of person who would listen before she acted. He had bet his safety on her character. She found that deeply, irritatingly interesting. "We're not verifying anything," Harry said. He was looking at her in the way he did when he already knew she was going somewhere he hadn't approved yet. "Of course not," Hermione said. "I mean it, Hermione. I understand that. Malfoy's father was in that graveyard last night. His voice was quiet, stripped of everything except the fact of it. He was standing next to Voldemort. He watched Cedric die. And you want to—" "I didn't say I wanted anything," Hermione said. "I said I heard a name." Ron was watching her the way he watched her when she was doing maths in her head, with a faint unease that was not quite suspicion and not quite admiration, and had never fully resolved into either. "You're going to check it, aren't you?" he said. Hermione looked out the window. "I'm going to confirm whether a particular civil servant is transferred to a particular department by the end of August," she said. "That's all. That's the same thing. It's really not." They pulled into King's Cross 40 minutes later, the platform loud and steaming and full of families rushing toward the carriages. Hermione let Harry and Ron go ahead to find a trolley. She told them she'd forgotten something in the overhead rack. She had not forgotten anything. She stood in the corridor and watched through the glass as the other compartments emptied. Draco's compartment was 4 doors down. She had checked from the corridor because she was thorough. Crabbe and Goyle were in the one after that, which meant he had sent them there, which meant the absence of his audience was not an accident. He had arranged to be alone for this. He had spent the last 2 hours of the school year sitting 4 doors down from Harry Potter's compartment, with no reinforcements, by choice. She watched him through the glass. His back was to her. He was sitting the way she had observed him sitting in examinations, very straight, very still, the particular posture of someone who had learned to perform composure, so young that it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. He wasn't reading, he wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting, watching the platform arrive, and the gray light from the window made the side of his face look like something carved from a material that had been asked to be colder than it was. The train stopped. In the final moment before the brakes fully engaged, Draco reached up and pressed his left palm flat against the window. Not toward her. He couldn't see her. It was directed at nothing. At the glass, at the station outside, at whatever he was looking at beyond the platform crowd. His hand pressed flat, palm down, and held there for 3 full seconds. Just pressure against cold glass. Just a pause, as if he was trying to leave an impression before the moment closed. Then his hand dropped. Hermione stood very still in the corridor. The name was already organized in her memory under 3 separate categories: verifiable, cross-referenced, filed. She had done this without deciding to, the way she had learned irregular verb conjugations at 7, and the entire periodic table at 9, and the precise wand movements for a switching spell at 11, not because someone asked her to, but because her mind treated information the same way it treated everything, as something that existed to be understood, to be used, to be held onto until it revealed what it was for. She filed the name. She told herself it was because it might be evidence. She did not examine what she would do if it turned out to be right. The study was the safest room in Malfoy Manor and the most dangerous place Draco had ever been. He understood this as a structural fact by the 2nd week of July. His father's study occupied the East Wing's 1st floor, separated from the main corridor by 2 locked doors, one with a standard Alohomora-proof enchantment, one with a bloodlock that recognized only Lucius, and by extension of the Malfoy bloodline, Draco. This was not an invitation. It was an architectural accident. Lucius had installed the bloodlock decades ago for the convenience of not needing to carry a key, and the consequence was that his 16-year-old son could walk through both doors at any hour without leaving a trace. Draco had discovered this in the 2nd week of June, the year he was 12, when he had gone looking for a reference text for a summer essay, and found, behind the 2nd door, a room that did not match the pretensions of the rest of the manor. There were no portraits in the study, no decorative silver, no curated display of the family's aesthetic self-regard. There was a desk, a lamp, 4 walls of shelves, and on those shelves, organized with the specific precision of a man who trusted no one with what the contents meant, the actual architecture of the Malfoy family's power. In the summer of 1991, Draco had not understood what he was looking at. In the summer of 1995, he understood it completely. The manor filled up in the second week of July. They came at odd hours, arriving by flu and by apparition, and, twice, by methods Draco didn't recognize, sudden presences in the entrance hall that the wards admitted without announcement. They were not the people his father had entertained before the Dark Lord's fall. Those guests had been ministry officials with good tailoring and careful smiles, and the particular social fluency of men who understood that power was performed as much as it was held. These visitors were something else. They moved through the house with the quiet certainty of people who had recently been reminded that certainty was all they had. Draco sat at every meal his father required him to attend. He sat straight, and he spoke when spoken to, and he demonstrated the appropriate reverence for the cause, which in practice meant a particular arrangement of his face that communicated receptive pride without anything that could be read as independent thought. He had learned this expression at approximately the same age he had learned to ride a broom. It was, in its way, an equal technical achievement. He spent every available hour that was not accounted for by meals and mandatory appearances in his father's study. The memory transcription charm was on page 412 of a gray magic archive text that had no title on its spine, just a Malfoy crest pressed into the leather and silver. The ink so old it had gone the color of old bone. Draco had found it in March of his third year, and read it with the methodical attention he applied to anything that might eventually be useful, which was everything. The charm allowed the caster to read a document, hold its contents in working memory, and then imprint those contents onto blank parchment with perfect accuracy, precise to the word, to the punctuation mark, to the specific layout of the original. No documents left the study. The charm left no magical residue on the originals. The copies, when complete, looked precisely as they should, handwritten, the ink slightly different in weight and character from the original, because they were coming from memory and not from a quill touching paper directly. But accurate. Completely, verifiably accurate. He divided what he took into 3 categories. Personnel first. Who was being recruited, from which families, through which chains of obligation and threat. He was thorough. He included the ones his father mentioned only obliquely, the names that appeared once in correspondence and were not repeated, because in his experience the names that weren't repeated were the ones that mattered most. Logistics second. Planned operations for the coming school year. Ministry positions being targeted for infiltration. Specific departments, he copied the memo about the Department of Magical Law Enforcement twice, because the name he had given Hermione Granger on the Hogwarts Express appeared in it 3 separate times, and he found that he wanted the weight of that confirmation somewhere outside his own head. Objects, third. He was not sure yet what he was looking for in this category. His father's correspondence contained references to objects in terms that were deliberate in their vagueness. Items of significance, objects requiring secure housing, artifacts requiring particular handling. He copied everything. He told himself it was thoroughness. He did not yet have the vocabulary for what he was actually tracking. The relay had taken him 4 days to build. He had taken the night bus to Muggle London on a Thursday, using a glamour charm he had refined from a text in the private archive. Not the crude surface-level glamours taught in third-year transfiguration, but a flesh-layer illusion that altered bone structure rather than just coloring, the kind that held under direct scrutiny and didn't register on standard detection spells. He had been, for approximately 6 hours, a brown-haired 17-year-old in Muggle clothing, standing in a Muggle post office in Holborn, filling out a form for a postal box in the name of a person who did not exist. The woman behind the counter had asked if he wanted to pay monthly or annually. He had paid annually. He had, until that moment, never held Muggle money. He had gone to Gringotts the day before and exchanged galleons with the specific indifference of someone who had always been taught that this kind of exchange was beneath him and was currently choosing not to examine what it meant that he was doing. Anyway, the relay ran through 2 intermediate addresses, one in Edinburgh, one through a wizarding postal service in Diagon Alley that processed packages without recording sender information, for a fee. At the end of it, an unmarked package arrived at a post office box in Oxford that Draco had addressed, in the same Muggle post office, to H. Granger. He included a note with each package. He told himself the notes were necessary context, that the intelligence required framing, that she needed to understand, for each delivery, where the information had come from, and how to weight its reliability. He told himself this with the same precision he applied to everything, and he did not examine whether it was true. The first note said, "The name I gave you on the train will have been confirmed by now." The second said, "The attached list is incomplete. I'll have the rest by Thursday." The fourth said, "My father asked me today why I seemed distracted. I told him I was studying for OWLs. He seemed satisfied. He believes I study the dark arts." The fifth note, written the week before term, said, "I don't know what to do with what I'm becoming." He sent it before he could reconsider. He spent 2 days considering whether he had made a catastrophic error. He did not send a retraction. He did not know how. The night of the blood vow was the 13th of July. He had found the ritual in the same archive text as the transcription charm, 6 pages after it, as though the compiler had understood that a person learning to copy documents in secret might eventually need something more permanent than copies. The text described it precisely and without sentiment, a binding of intent, not action. A declaration of magical priority entered into alone, requiring only blood and a named anchor and the will to mean it. He read it 4 times. He put the book down. He picked it up again. The Malfoy silver knife was in the desk drawer, the one with the serpent handle, the one his grandfather had used for the same category of working before the practice had been reclassified under the 1945 Magical Regulation Amendments as gray spectrum but not prohibited. Draco took it out. He sat at the desk with the genealogical text open in front of him, the one that contained the blood anchor formula, the specific language required to name the protected person in terms the magic would recognize as precise. Hermione Jean Granger. He wrote the name on the parchment in his own blood before the cut had properly closed, the letters pressing into the page with the specific darkness of ink that knows it is being asked to mean something permanent. He spoke the formula aloud, quietly because the manor was never fully silent, and there were things in the walls of this house that listened. He pressed his palm flat against the name on the parchment. The magic moved through him like a door closing. Not a dramatic door, not a door thrown shut in anger, a door closed by someone who had made a decision and wanted it recorded. The scar that formed on his palm was silver white when he lifted his hand from the parchment. Not red, not the color of a fresh wound, but the color of something that had already decided it was permanent. It looked, he thought, like metal that had learned to be skin. He sat with it for a long time in the lamplight. He had expected to feel, at minimum, the specific vertigo of a significant decision. What he felt instead was something he did not have a precise word for. The absence of a question he had apparently been carrying for 4 years without recognizing it as a question. He had not done it because it was good. He had not done it to be on the right side of something. He had done it because 4 weeks ago he had sat in a room in Wiltshire and watched his father lay a document on the table, a list, written in the clean administrative language of people who have decided to be procedural about what they are planning, and had seen her name in the category that meant she was scheduled to stop existing. And something in him had said, with a clarity that had nothing to do with virtue, no, just that, just no, the way you say no to a physical fact, the way your hand pulls back from fire. He blew out the lamp. He went to bed. He slept without dreaming, which was unusual. The dinner at the end of August was a Wednesday. The table was set for 3, which meant Lucius was not expecting additional guests, which meant this was a family matter presented in the format of a meal. Draco recognized the structure. He had eaten enough of these dinners to know that the food was not the point. There are certain postal irregularities, Lucius said, between the soup and the main course, in the voice he used when he wanted something to sound like an observation, rather than an accusation. Connected to an address in London that I do not recognize. Draco looked up from his bowl. He arranged his face. A contact in Slytherin, he said. Zabini uses a Muggle relay for sourcing rare potion ingredients. The suppliers don't accept Owl Post. I've been using the same address for a flobberworm-based reagent. I've been sourcing for extra credit work. Lucius looked at him for 7 seconds. Draco counted. His father had a particular rhythm to his scrutiny. He applied exactly as much of it as the situation warranted, and then precisely stopped because efficiency was its own kind of power. Extra credit, Lucius repeated, for potions. Professor Snape indicated there were advanced applications I might benefit from pursuing independently. Another 3 seconds. Then Lucius lifted his fork and returned to his meal, and the matter was apparently settled, and Draco breathed through his nose and tasted nothing of the food for the rest of the course. At the end of the table, Narcissa reached for the teapot. She poured Draco's cup without being asked. She did not look at him while she did it. She set the pot down. She returned to her own meal. It was the only confirmation he needed. He drank the tea. It was the right temperature. It had always been the right temperature of things for the people she loved since before Draco could remember. Quietly, without acknowledgement, as though warmth delivered without announcement was the only kind she trusted to last. He thought about a note he had written the week before. I don't know what to do with what I'm becoming. He thought about the silver scar on his palm, beneath his glove, pressing against the table's edge. North, it said. Still north. He finished his tea. The inquisitorial squad met every Tuesday at 6 in the morning in Umbridge's office, which smelled of rose water and something older underneath it. Parchment, perhaps, or the specific staleness of a room where authority had been performed so many times that it had soaked into the walls. Draco was always there first. This was not, as Pansy assumed, because he was enthusiastic. It was because arriving first meant 4 unobserved minutes in the corridor outside Umbridge's office, long enough to read the patrol schedule pinned inside the door. When it stood ajar, long enough to note which names appeared on the internal correspondence stacked on the desk's corner, long enough to memorize the floor plan of an investigation that changed weekly, as Umbridge's suspicions shifted and narrowed, and occasionally in the way of suspicious people who have not yet found what they are looking for, expanded suddenly in the wrong direction. He had been doing this since the first week of September. By October, he had a precise map of Umbridge's informant network inside Hogwarts. By November, he knew which students she had flagged as probable DA members, ranked by her confidence level. By December, he understood something about Dolores Umbridge that she would not have wanted him to understand. She was not acting alone, and the chain of authority she reported to did not end with Cornelius Fudge. He filed this away. He filed everything away. The study at the manor had taught him that information was only useless when you failed to retain it. He sent the first Hogwarts relay message on the 15th of September. It arrived in Hermione's possession, through the Oxford relay and a second-year Hufflepuff who worked as an unwitting intermediary, as what appeared to be a pamphlet advertising Madame Pimpernel's beautifying potions. The relevant text was on the inner fold, invisible until exposed to a specific spell. He had included the revealing charm in the pamphlet's small print, listed as an exclusive discount code, which was the kind of mundane disguise that worked precisely because it was too boring to be suspicious. The message said, "Patrol rotations enclosed. Northwest staircase and 5th floor corridor are both clear Thursday from 7 to 8. If anyone is meeting, they should use those routes. Pass this where it needs to go." He did not sign it. Hermione, reading it in the Gryffindor common room with her back to Ron and Harry in the warmth of the fire, understood immediately what she was holding and what it meant, and also the specific, unresolved problem of what to do with the understanding that Draco Malfoy had just protected something he was publicly employed to destroy. She passed the patrol information to Harry. She told him she had a source. Harry had looked at her with the particular expression he reserved for situations where he suspected she knew more than she was telling him, which was most situations, and she had said, without inflection, "It's reliable. Use it." They used it. The DA's Thursday meeting was the most successful of the term. The pansy problem arrived in November. Draco had not anticipated it, which was unusual for him, and which he noted as a structural flaw in his planning. He had accounted for Umbridge's surveillance patterns, her informant cycles, the ministry owls that arrived on Mondays and Thursdays. He had not accounted for Pansy Parkinson's ability to be in exactly the wrong place through no motivated effort at all. She had seen Hermione in the restricted section. She had not understood what she was seeing. Hermione was there legitimately, with a signed permission slip, researching for the kind of extra credit project that Pansy would not have fabricated even under examination pressure, because it would not have occurred to her that extra credit was something people did voluntarily. But Pansy had seen her, and Pansy, who had been reporting anything potentially useful to Umbridge since October, with the reliable enthusiasm of someone who had confused access to authority with friendship, had written it up. The report landed in the inquisitorial squad's weekly filing on a Wednesday morning. Draco read it in the 6-minute window between the end of the Tuesday meeting and Umbridge's return to her desk from a brief absence he had, over the previous weeks, established as reliably 6 to 8 minutes in duration. He read it, he put it in his bag. He placed a fabricated version, Hermione Granger, observed in the corridor outside the restricted section, moving toward the east staircase, nothing irregular noted, in the filing stack in its place. He sat through the rest of the meeting with the fabricated report 3 feet from Umbridge's right hand, and said, when she asked him directly whether there were any irregularities to note regarding Gryffindor's 6th years, nothing specific. Granger's been in the library more than usual. Academic overachievement as far as I can tell. I wouldn't dignify it with surveillance resources. Umbridge had made a small sound that communicated she found exceptional academic effort in Muggle-born students slightly distasteful, and moved on. Draco had looked at his hands under the table, silver scar against pale skin. Still there, still certain. The blood quill summons came on a Thursday in March. He had seen it coming for 2 weeks. Umbridge had worked through her list with the methodical patience of a person who believed that procedure was the same thing as justice. One name at a time, one afternoon session at a time, students emerging from her office in the pale, careful way of people who had been hurt in a place that left no visible mark. Except the one on their hand. Harry had come back from his 3rd session without looking at anyone for the rest of the day, and Hermione had sat across from him at dinner and watched his face with an expression that Draco, from the Slytherin table, recognized without being able to explain how. The expression of someone calculating what they can absorb on behalf of someone else. Her name was next. He had seen it in the filing 3 days ago. He told himself as he prepared the scroll in the Slytherin common room on Wednesday night that this was a tactical decision, that Hermione Granger was a primary intelligence asset, that her being subjected to a blood quill that left documented evidence of ministry torture created a liability in the operation's overall security architecture. He told himself this with the same precision he had applied to the reasoning behind the blood vow, and he applied the same level of self-examination to it, which was none. His mother had prepared the legal language in August, when he had written to her with what he described as a hypothetical question about pre-ministry noble family protections. Her response had arrived in a sealed letter addressed in her handwriting. Precise, unhurried. The letters pressed into the page with the confidence of someone who had been making irreversible decisions on behalf of people she loved for a very long time. The right of family interference was cited in full. The relevant clauses from the 1472 Wizarding Protections Act were transcribed with her own annotations. At the bottom, in a postscript that occupied 3 lines and said nothing and everything, the seal wax for the crest is in the left desk drawer. Use the burgundy. He had used the burgundy. The corridor outside Umbridge's office was empty, except for Hermione. She was standing 3 feet from the door, wearing her school robes and the expression of someone who had made a decision they did not like and had decided to implement it anyway. He recognized this expression. He had spent 4 years sitting across examination halls from it. He was walking toward her from the direction of the charms corridor, not hurrying, the sealed scroll tucked under his left arm, with the Malfoy crest visible on the wax. He had timed this. He knew what time her summons was for. He had been in the corridor for 40 seconds already, having taken the longer route to allow himself the appearance of arriving rather than waiting. She saw him, her chin lifted 3 degrees in the way it did when she was deciding whether a situation required her to be defensive. "Go back to your common room," he said. Not a request, not an apology. The voice he used when he had already run every version of this and decided. She looked at the scroll. She looked at his face. Malfoy, he knocked on Umbridge's door. He opened it before she could answer. Umbridge's office was precisely what he expected. Pink in every surface, decorative plates covering the walls, a fire burning at a temperature calibrated to suggest warmth while providing none. She was behind her desk. She looked at him with the particular expression she reserved for people she found useful. Assessed, filed, available. "Draco," she said with the sweetness of something artificial. "I wasn't expecting. I need to speak with you about a scheduling conflict." He placed the scroll on her desk. "This is a right of family interference under the 1472 Wizarding Protections Act. You'll find the seal is Malfoy Estate, issued under Regent authority, citing clauses 4 through 7 of the Pre-Ministry Noble Protection Framework." Umbridge looked at the scroll. She did not pick it up. "I'm not sure what this has to do with. You have scheduled a remedial session for this afternoon with Hermione Granger." He said the name with the specific neutrality of a person reading from a document. "She is listed in the filing under DA suspected. The session involves disciplinary measures, I understand, to include the blood quill." He folded his hands in front of him. "That session cannot proceed." Umbridge's face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession. The first was surprise. The second was calculation. The third was the specific, controlled fury of a person who has just realized they are in a situation they cannot manage with the tools currently available to them. "Educational decree, 29 grants me full authority over student disciplinary. Educational Decree 29 was issued in 1995 by the Minister for Magic under authority granted by the 1907 Educational Standards Act. His voice was completely level. It had the quality of something that had been prepared, not performed. The quality of a document read aloud by someone who understood every word. The Malfoy family right of interference was established in 1472. Minister Fudge cannot override a 600-year-old noble family protocol with a 1-year-old administrative decree. He paused. I invite you to take it to the Wessengamot. I understand my father has friends there. The silence that followed had a very specific texture. Umbridge understood, in it, exactly two things simultaneously. The first was that the scroll was legally sound. She could see enough of its language to know it had been prepared by someone who knew what they were doing, and the Malfoy name attached to it carried a weight she could not dismiss without consequences. She was not equipped to manage. The second was the thing she could not say, could not report, could not bring to anyone's attention without detonating her own position in the only two power structures that currently mattered. A Malfoy was protecting a Muggle-born. The political geometry of that fact was so catastrophic in both Ministry and Death Eater terms that her most effective weapon against him was also the one she could not touch. She picked up the scroll. I'll review this, she said. Of course. He moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, which was the same gesture he had made on the train, and he did not examine whether that was deliberate. The session for this afternoon will not be rescheduled. The right covers the remainder of the academic year. You'll find Clause 7 addresses ongoing applicability. He closed the door behind him. She was still there. He had expected her to leave. She had not left. She was standing in the corridor, with her arms at her sides and an expression he had not catalogued yet. Not quite relief, not quite anger, not quite the cool assessment she had turned on him at King's Cross. Something in between all three still settling. You protected me in there, she said. Not a question. An assessment, exactly as he had known it would be. I moved a piece on a board, he said. Don't make it sentimental. I don't. A beat. I checked everything you sent me over the summer, every single item. It was all accurate. He said nothing. The corridor was empty. Somewhere below them, Hogwarts went about its afternoon. The distant percussion of a class changing. A door opening somewhere on the floor below. The specific ambient sound of a castle that had been absorbing human noise for 1,000 years and had learned not to distinguish one kind from another. Thank you, Hermione said. The words were precise and deliberate, and cost her something, and he could hear the cost in the way it came out. Not reluctant, but weighted. The way you say thank you when the alternative was never going to be an option, and you know it and you say it anyway, because some things deserve to be said even when they're already understood. He left without answering. The corridor was empty at the east end, where it turned toward the staircase. He walked until the turn, and then he stopped, and he pressed his left palm flat against the stone wall. Cold, old, indifferent, the way this castle's walls were always indifferent, and he let out a breath that had been somewhere in his chest since the 13th of July. The scar was warm against the stone. It was always warm. He had noticed this in August and had not had a framework for it, and still did not, except that warmth without a source was the definition of something that had decided it was permanent. He straightened, he adjusted his robes, he walked to potions. He did not look back. The restricted section at midnight had a particular quality of silence that the rest of the Hogwarts library did not. It was not the absence of sound. The castle made its own sounds at every hour. The low, structural complaint of ancient stone contracting in cold air, the occasional distant percussion of something moving behind a wall that Hermione had long since categorized as either a ghost or a portrait, and decided not to investigate further. It was the quality of the silence that was different. The restricted section's silence was the silence of things that had been waiting to be read for a very long time, and had learned patience. Hermione had been in this part of the library 5 times before tonight, always with legitimate permission, always for a specific text, always gone before the castle fully settled into its late-hour quiet. Tonight she had Slughorn's signed pass in her pocket, obtained after 3 weeks of careful groundwork, 2 sessions of extended conversation about obscure potion theory, and 1 deliberately impressive display of familiarity with texts she had no business having read at 15, and she had a specific section in mind. The theory had begun, as most of her theories began, with a question that wouldn't resolve. Voldemort had died. The killing curse had rebounded. A man who had reorganized his entire existence around the mechanics of power should not have been destroyed by a rebounding curse, unless the curse had not, in fact, destroyed him. Unless what everyone understood as death had been something structurally different. Unless the Dark Lord had, at some point prior to the night in Godric's Hollow, taken precautions that precluded the ordinary operation of mortality. She had been following this logic through every legitimate source available to her for 3 months. She had reached, on the 14th of October, a theoretical framework that she had written out in the back of her 7th notebook, in small letters, precisely because small letters felt more appropriate for something this heavy. Deliberate soul division. Anchored in object. External to the body, reachable only through destruction of the anchor itself. She needed the word for it. The word was, in this section, she had found a reference in 2 secondary texts, both citing the same source, neither quoting it, both treating it as something that required a certain kind of nerve to look at directly. She pushed through the low iron gate. She turned left toward the shelf she had identified. Draco Malfoy was already there. He was at the far end of the restricted section's only reading table, positioned with his back to the wall and 2 books open in front of him, one that she recognized as a restricted section text, one that she did not recognize at all. The unfamiliar one was older than anything she had seen outside a museum. Its cover was plain, dark, the leather worn at the corners into something that looked almost soft. No title on the spine, just the Malfoy crest in silver that had gone the color of old bone. He looked up when she came through the gate. Neither of them spoke for 4 seconds. "Your pass is legitimate," he said. Not a question. He had already looked at her hand, at the parchment she was holding, at the ink of Slughorn's signature still visible even in the low lamplight. "Otherwise, the gate doesn't open." "I'm aware of how gates work," Hermione said. She walked to the shelf she needed. She found the text, the darkest of arts, thin, unassuming, with a cover that had been repaired so many times the original material was indistinguishable from the restoration. She brought it to the table. She sat at the opposite end from Draco, which was approximately 6 feet of old oak between them, and she opened it to the index. She was aware, with the specific peripheral precision that she had applied to Draco Malfoy since September of their first year, that he had not looked back at his books. "You're researching the same thing I am," he said. "I don't know what you're researching." "Yes, you do." He turned the unfamiliar book around and slid it across the table toward her. Not all the way. It stopped in the middle of the oak, equidistant between them, an offering and a boundary at the same time. She looked at the page. It was open to. The text was in archaic English, dense and unspaced in the way of documents written before the standardization of the printed page. The letters pressed into the parchment with a quill that had been heavier than modern quills. She read 12 lines and then looked up. "Where did you get this?" "My family's private archive. It doesn't exist in the Hogwarts collection or the Ministry's restricted catalog. As far as official magical scholarship is concerned, it doesn't exist at all. It describes the mechanics of soul division." Yes, anchored in external objects, multiple anchors, the host body becoming one of many rather than the primary vessel. Yes. She looked at him across the table. He was watching her read with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the studied performance of contempt, not the careful neutrality of their corridor exchanges. Something stripped. Something that looked, if she had been forced to name it, like relief so profound it had worn the face of exhaustion. "You've been carrying this alone," she said. I'm not offering sympathy, I'm identifying a tactical deficiency." She pulled the darkest of arts toward her and opened it beside the Malfoy text. "You have 600 years of dark arts genealogy and no analytical framework for Voldemort's specific application of the theory. I have the analytical framework and no primary sources old enough to confirm it." She looked at both books. She looked at him. "We've been solving the same puzzle from opposite ends." The silence that followed had a different quality from the restricted section's usual silence. It was the silence of 2 people recalibrating. "You've been reading the same source I have," he said. "Not the book, the theoretical thread, the logic, from completely different directions. And we reached the same answer." "Yes." She smoothed the page of the darkest of arts flat with her palm. "That's going to be a problem for one of us." "Which one?" "Whichever one was hoping the other was wrong." They worked for 3 hours. It did not feel like 3 hours. It felt like the particular compression of time that occurred when a problem was finally large enough to hold two people's full attention simultaneously. When the thinking stopped being individual and became something else. Not collaborative exactly, not at first, but contiguous, adjacent. Two separate processes running parallel and then, incrementally, beginning to inform each other. She cross-referenced. He sourced. She identified the structural logic. He provided the historical evidence that either confirmed or complicated it. When she reached conclusions too quickly, he pushed back, not with the reflexive opposition of someone trying to win, but with the specific resistance of someone who had spent a summer reading documents that described what these conclusions meant in practice and needed her to be certain before he accepted them as foundation. This was, Hermione thought at some point past 2 a.m, what argument was supposed to feel like. The Lestrange vault, he said, around the second hour. She looked up. My father included me in an inventory review in August. Family obligation, the Lestranges are incapacitated and certain assets require Malfoy oversight under the Death Eater protocols. He was looking at the page in front of him, not at her. There's an object in the vault. A cup. Badger on the side. Gold Hufflepuff-era make based on the hallmarks. The magical signature doesn't match its apparent age. He paused. It reads older on the inside than the outside. She was very still. An object that reads older on the inside than the outside, she said, would suggest that the magical content of the object was established before the object was acquired, or that something was introduced into the object after its creation that carries an older magical signature than the object itself. A soul fragment, he said, would carry the age of the soul it came from. And Voldemort was born in 1926. But his earliest known magical education began approximately 1938. If he divided his soul in stages, and if the first division occurred at Hogwarts during his years as a student, then the fragment inside the cup could read as 12 years older than the date of acquisition. She looked at the Malfoy text. She looked at the cup's description in his notes, which he had passed her without being asked. 30 minutes into the session, the Lestranges acquired it in the mid-1970s, which would mean the fragment inside it could read as originating in the 1940s. Yes. She picked up her quill. She wrote 4 lines in her notebook, precise, numbered each one a logical step, and underlined the final one twice. This is evidence, she said. It's a start. It's more than anyone else has. She looked up at him. Does anyone know you're telling me this? No. The lamp between them had burned low over the past 3 hours, the wick settling into the last of the oil, the light narrowing to something that made the shadows at the table's edges very close, and the circle of visibility very small. In it, she could see his hands on the parchment clearly. He had removed his gloves sometime in the second hour to handle the old pages. The Malfoy text required bare skin contact to remain open on a specific passage. A gray magic binding she had observed and filed away for later, and his hands were visible on the table. The scar on his left palm caught the light. Silver white, the width of a deliberate cut, healed into something that did not look like a wound exactly, more like a decision that the skin had incorporated. She had noticed it in October, the first time she had seen him without gloves in 3 years. And she had not asked because she had been in the middle of cross-referencing a footnote, and the question had arrived too late for the moment. Now the moment was available. What is that? She said. He followed her gaze. He did not pull his hand away, which she noted. A choice I made, he said. What kind of choice? The permanent kind. She held his gaze. Not warm, not cold. She was applying the same analysis she applied to everything, reading the available information against what it implied, mapping the shape of what wasn't being said against the shape of what was. He was not going to tell her the full answer tonight. She understood this the way she understood when a text was going to require multiple sessions, not because the information wasn't there, but because the order of things mattered, and this was not the right place in the sequence. I need to see that library, she said. The Malfoy archive isn't a lending facility. I'm not asking to borrow it. I'm asking you to continue sharing relevant material as you identify it. She closed her notebook. I trust your research. That doesn't mean I trust you. He looked down at the parchment. I know the difference, he said. Pre-dawn light came through the high restricted section windows, in the specific gray that preceded color, the light that didn't illuminate so much as suggest that illumination was coming, that the world was preparing itself. Hermione registered it with the part of her that maintained ambient awareness regardless of what the rest of her was doing, and then she registered that she was cold. And then she registered that she had fallen asleep over her notes at some point in the last hour. She lifted her head. Her notes were beneath her forearm, the last few lines of writing slightly smeared where her sleeve had pressed against fresh ink. Across the table, Draco was asleep, entirely, genuinely asleep, in the specific graceless way of people who had stopped performing unconsciousness and allowed it to actually happen. His head rested on his folded arms. The careful architecture of his expression was gone. What was underneath it was a face that was 16 years old, and nothing more. His left hand was open on the table beside the Malfoy text. The silver scar was visible in the gray morning light. It looked, she thought, like something that had already decided it was permanent, had also decided it was warm. She pulled her notes toward her. She uncapped her quill. She began transcribing the critical sections from the Malfoy text onto fresh parchment, working quietly and precisely in the early light. Her handwriting smaller than usual, because she had less space than she would have liked, and there was a great deal to record. She did not tell herself this was nothing. She filed it under complications, a category she had created in year 3 for situations that required ongoing monitoring without immediate resolution. And she kept writing until the light came fully through the windows and the castle began, around her, to wake. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late July, delivered not by owl, but by hand. One of Voldemort's personal couriers, a silent wizard in gray robes who appeared in the manor's entrance hall at 7 in the morning and spoke 4 words to Lucius before vanishing. Draco heard it from the first-floor landing. He heard his father say in the voice Lucius used when he had received an instruction that he would have preferred not to receive but understood the consequences of refusing. "Of course, we are honored." Then the entrance hall went quiet. Then Lucius's footsteps moved toward the study. Then the study door closed. Draco stood on the landing for a long moment. Outside, the Wiltshire morning was pale and clear, the kind of summer morning that had no opinion about what was happening inside the houses beneath it. He looked at his left palm. The silver scar sat in the light, warm against his skin, the same temperature it had been since July of last year, which was the temperature of something that had decided what it was. He went downstairs. He did not go to the study. He went to his mother. Narcissa was in the conservatory, the small private one off the east corridor that the family used for nothing formal. No guests were received here, no meetings held, no negotiations conducted. It had 3 chairs and a great deal of light and a view of the gardens that Narcissa maintained herself, without magic, in the precise and patient way she maintained most things that mattered to her. She was standing at the window when he came in. She did not turn around. "You already know," he said. "Your father received the letter last night," she said. "He didn't tell me what it said. He didn't need to." She paused. "The assignment is confirmed, then." Dumbledore. And the other thing. He sat down in the nearest chair. The light came through the conservatory glass in long-angled strips and landed on the floor between them. Outside, the gardens were very green and very still. "The other thing," he said, "is a problem." Narcissa turned from the window. She was wearing gray, the particular gray she wore when she was not performing Malfoy wife and was simply being herself, which was, as Draco had always understood, a more dangerous person. She looked at him with her gray eyes, which were his gray eyes, and she was already thinking several moves ahead. He could see it in the set of her jaw. "Show me the scar," she said. He held out his left palm. She crossed the room and took his hand in both of hers. She examined the scar the way she examined everything that required careful handling, completely without flinching, her thumbs tracing the edges of it, with the attention of someone who needed to understand the full structure before she decided what to do with it. "Blood vow of protection," she said. "Yes. Bound to a named person. Yes." She released his hand. She did not ask who. She had known since August of last year, and Draco had known that she had known. And neither of them had addressed it directly, because this family had always communicated the most important things through the precise management of what they did not say. The dark mark, Narcissa said, would register as a betrayal of the named person. The vow would respond. She said this the way she said everything she had already worked out completely. As a statement of fact that required confirmation, not discovery. The consequences would be immediate, possibly fatal. I know. Then taking the mark is not an option. That's not how the Dark Lord sees it. No. She returned to the window. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the light in the conservatory shifted by a degree or two, and the gardens outside went from still to very slightly moving in a wind that had come from somewhere. "There is something in the archive," she said. "Third floor, east shelving, between the Glamour Compendium and the Ward construction texts. Your grandfather used it twice, once in 1942, once in 1944. He had reasons that I won't explain now, and that you don't need to know." She paused. "It's called a glamour seal. It's not a surface charm. It operates at the level of flesh, replicating the magical signature of the targeted enchantment without carrying its actual binding." Draco looked at her back. "It would fool a detection spell," he said. "It would fool a Legilemens conducting a surface scan. It would fool the sympathetic bond check that a fellow marked Death Eater might run to confirm shared allegiance." She turned back to him. "It would not fool a direct Legilemens penetrating full occlumency, which means you would need to ensure that no one with that capability ever has reason to look. My occlumency is— I know what your occlumency is. I helped you build it." She said this without pride or warmth, as a structural observation. "It's sufficient. The question is whether you can sustain it across every interaction with every Death Eater who might check, across every meeting, every patrol, every moment for as long as this war continues." He thought about the summer he had spent in his father's study. He thought about 12 months of inquisitorial squad meetings, and Umbridge's office and patrol schedules memorized, and reports fabricated, and a relay system maintained without a single breach. He thought about the right of family interference scroll, prepared in his room with his mother's annotations, and delivered without his hand shaking. "Yes," he said. Narcissa looked at him for a long time. The gray eyes, the specific quality of her attention, which was the most complete attention he had ever been the subject of, and which had never once required him to be anything other than precisely what he was. "Tonight," she said, "before your father arranges the ceremony, the ritual takes 40 minutes and requires absolute quiet. Come to me at 11. She turned back to the gardens. "The Dumbledore assignment," Draco said. "We will discuss what to do about that in September, Mother." She was quiet. "The Dumbledore assignment isn't something I'm going to complete." She did not move. The gardens outside were still. The light was the same. "I know," she said. The ceremony was held 3 days later in the West Drawing Room. It was not a large gathering. 7 Death Eaters. Lucius, Voldemort himself. The room had been cleared of furniture, except for a single high-backed chair at the far end that Voldemort occupied, with the specific stillness of someone who did not need to perform authority, because authority was a fact of their presence in a room. He watched Draco approach with red eyes that were old in a way that had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with what had been done to get there. Draco presented his left arm. He had worn the glamour seal for 4 days. Narcissa had applied it at 11 on Tuesday night in her private rooms, with the door warded and the lights low, using a technique so precise that it had taken the full 40 minutes she had promised, her wand moving in sequences he did not fully recognize against the skin of his forearm, with the concentration of someone performing surgery. When she finished, she had pressed her fingertips against the inside of his wrist, checking something. Checking that the pulse below the seal's boundary was unaffected, that the magical layering had not compressed the vessels beneath it. Then she had said, "It will feel warm when contact is made. Let it." Voldemort's wand moved across his arm. The pattern of the dark mark traced itself in motion. The skull, the serpent, the specific sequence of dark magic that had been building in the room since the moment Voldemort entered it, heavy and cold and smelling of something that had no natural analog. The glamour seal responded to the contact exactly as his mother had designed it to, registering the mark's magical frequency, absorbing the pattern, producing against the surface of Draco's skin the visible brand, black, complete, exact. Draco felt it the way his mother had described, warm, a pressure that was not quite pain, not quite heat, more like the sensation of something being recorded. His occlumency was as flat and featureless as frozen water. It had been since he walked into the room. Voldemort looked up. On Draco's forearm, the dark mark burned black and complete against pale skin. Under the glamour seal, his arm was unmarked. The kitchen was quiet at midnight. It was not the formal kitchen, the one the house elves used for entertaining, where everything was scaled for performance. It was the private one, small, stone-floored, smelling of the tea that was always there, and the herbs that grew in the window box that faced the inner courtyard. The table was old enough that its surface had developed the specific smoothness of wood that had been used for the same purposes by the same family for a very long time. Draco sat at it. He had been sitting at it for 11 minutes, since he came down from the West Wing where the ceremony had been held, and the congratulations had been offered, and the appropriate expression had been maintained, and then the guests had flewed and dissipated, and his father had looked at him, once, directly, before disappearing toward his study. Narcissa came in and sat across from him. "He'll find out eventually," Draco said. "Yes. What do we do? The same thing we always do." She folded her hands on the table. "We survive until we find a better option." The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the Wiltshire night was the specific deep blue that came before black, the hour between midnight and the part of darkness that had given up pretending the morning was coming. He could hear the manor around them, the low structural sound of a house that had been holding its breath for 2 years. Then his mother said in a different register, not the strategic voice, not the voice that had walked him through the glamour seal ritual, something quieter and more direct. The girl. He did not look away. He did not deny it. "Her name is Hermione," he said. Narcissa looked at him for a long moment. He had her eyes, and she could read them the way she read everything in this house. For threat level, for structural integrity, for the precise moment when something beautiful was going to break. She was reading him now with all of that and something else underneath it. Something that was not the Malfoy calculus, that came from a place that predated the house and the name and the obligations attached to both. "I know her name," she said. The relay package reached Hermione in the 3rd week of August, encoded in a letter that appeared to concern OWL results and contained in the 7th paragraph a sequence of characters that resolved under the revealing spell as 11 lines of dense text. She read it 3 times. Mark applied. "It is not what it looks like. I will explain when I can. If anyone attempts to use the mark to locate me, the readings will be real, but the destination will be wrong. You need to tell Dumbledore there is a false mark in play. The seal's signature is indistinguishable from the genuine article under all but the most direct legilimency. It will hold. The Dumbledore assignment will not be completed by me. I cannot tell you more than this yet." She sat with it in the garden of her parents' house in Oxford, in the specific late summer afternoon that smelled of cut grass and carried the last warmth of a summer that was ending. She read the final line again. "I cannot tell you more than this yet." She thought about a palm pressed flat against train glass. She thought about a silver scar in lamplight. She thought about a boy who had spent 3 years making irreversible decisions in private rooms, and then handing her the results without asking for anything in return. She filed the message in the notebook she kept separate from the others, the one marked with no title, the one that lived at the bottom of her bag, under everything else. She wrote 4 words beneath his decoded text. "Complications," she wrote. Then, after a pause, smaller, increasing. She told Dumbledore the following morning. He sat across from her in his office. Half-moon spectacles, the particular quality of his stillness, the firelight catching the silver instruments on the shelves, and he listened to everything she said without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. That was longer than silence needed to be. "You've been managing this alone." He said. "I've been managing it correctly," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her over the spectacles with an expression she had catalogued once and would catalogue again in the years to come. The expression of someone who had lived long enough to recognize precision when it arrived in an unexpected form. "The false mark changes our planning for several Year 6 operations," he said. "I know, I've made notes." She produced them. He took them. He looked at the first page. He looked at her. "Miss Granger," he said, with the specific weight he applied to words when he meant more than the words contained, "I owe a considerable debt to whoever decided to trust you with this operation." She thought, he didn't decide to trust me. He decided she was worth a blood vow. The trust came with it. She said, "The intelligence is reliable. What matters is what we do with it." Dumbledore almost smiled. "Yes," he said, "it always is." The Forest of Dean in October had a specific quality of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of a place that had not been asked to accommodate human habitation and was not adjusting to it. The trees did not care. The ground did not care. The darkness between the trees at 2 in the afternoon was the darkness of somewhere that had decided long ago what it was. And 2 teenagers huddled under a disillusionment charm, arguing in low urgent voices, had not changed that calculation. Hermione had been in the tent for 6 days. She had her notebooks. 3 of them, the ones she had managed to grab from the house on Grimmauld Place before the wards fell. And she had the Malfoy archive material she had spent the past 2 years transcribing by hand into a separate volume, and she had a list of 7 objects that she could account for, and a gap in the middle of that list that she could not stop looking at. The relay had been silent for 3 weeks. She had told herself this was because Draco was at Hogwarts under Snape's headmastership, and the surveillance there was the most total it had ever been. She had told herself the silence was tactical, not informational. She had filed the concern under active monitoring and continued working because the alternative to working was thinking about what the silence might mean. And Hermione Granger did not find silence from a known intelligence source reassuring, simply because she had decided not to find it concerning. Then, the owl arrived. It was not one of the relay owls, not the Edinburgh barn owl or the Diagon Alley postal bird she had learned to recognize over 2 years. It was a small gray bird she had never seen before, arriving at dusk with a package tied to its leg and a look of profound indifference to the 3 people who stared at it. The package was sealed with plain wax. No crest. The outside bore only a number, 6, in a handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. She opened it. Harry was at the tent entrance when she came in from the tree line. He took one look at her face and straightened. "What is it?" She put the package on the table. She had read it twice standing in the dark between the trees, once quickly and once slowly, and both times her mind had gone to the same place, the restricted section at midnight, 2 books open on a table, a convergence of 2 separate lines of reasoning arriving at the same answer from opposite directions. That had been the first time she understood what Draco was actually doing, and this was the second. "Sit down," she said. "Get Ron." Ron emerged from the back of the tent, still pulling on a jumper, his hair flattened on one side from sleep, his expression moving through several states in quick succession. As he registered Hermione's face and the package on the table, and the fact that she was already sorting the contents into 4 separate stacks, with the precise deliberation of someone who needed to present a large amount of information in the correct order. "This came through the relay," she said. "I need you both to read it in sequence. Don't ask questions until I finish explaining." Harry sat, Ron sat, they read. The first stack was 3 pages. Confirmation of the Hufflepuff Cup's location in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts, with a physical description so specific, 3rd shelf from the floor, north wall, behind the Lestrange family silver, marked with a badger crest on the handle, that it could only have come from someone who had been inside that vault. The second stack was 2 pages, a cross-reference from the Malfoy genealogical archive, tracing the full Blackgaunt family tree, with a note in the margin in Draco's handwriting, "The ring Dumbledore destroyed in year 6. The stone is Gaunt family inheritance. This is the one he lost his hand to. I believe you already know what it was. This confirms the lineage and the acquisition date." Harry went very still reading this. He did not say anything. The 3rd stack was a single page, a partial map, the high-security vault corridor at Gringotts, the section that housed the oldest family accounts, with the Lestrange vault marked by a small cross and 3 annotations noting the vault's proximity to the cart system, the detection ward placement, and the single structural weakness in the corridor's defensive grid. A 12-second window during vault change rotations when the alarm sequence reset. 12 seconds. Ron said, "How does he know any of this?" "His family has maintained affiliated estate status with the Lestranges for 30 years, Hermione said. "Bellatrix is his aunt. The family has had access to the high-security wing under inheritance protocols for decades." She reached for the 4th stack, which is also why this is possible. She placed it on the table. It was a single document, heavier than the others, the parchment a quality that Hermione recognized from the Malfoy archive texts. Old stock, durable, the kind that held magical signatures without degrading. At the top, in formal wizarding legal script, Vault Inheritance Protocol, Affiliated Estate, Access Extension. And at the bottom, in dried dark brown that was not ink, a thumbprint, his blood, pressed into the seal beside 3 names written in the same hand. Harry Potter, Ronald Weasley, Hermione Granger. She was still looking at the document when the tent entrance opened. She knew, before she turned around, that this was not a forest sound or a branch settling in the wind. She knew by the way Harry's wand came up and Ron was on his feet in the same half-second, and by the particular quality of the silence that followed, the silence of a space adjusting to the presence of someone who had not been in it a moment ago. Draco stood at the tent entrance. He was wearing a muggle coat, dark wool, slightly too large, the kind of thing purchased for invisibility rather than fit. His school robes were gone. He looked, she thought, like someone who had been making practical decisions very quickly for several days, and had not slept between them. His face carried the specific exhaustion of sustained occlumency, which she had learned to recognize over 2 years, the flatness around the eyes, the slight over-precision of the jaw. Harry's wand was pointed at his chest. "Put that down," Draco said, not to Harry. To the air, the way he said things that were addressed to a situation rather than a person. "I'll put it down when I decide to," Harry said. Draco looked at him with the particular expression he reserved for positions he found structurally insufficient. Then he looked at Hermione. She held the document. She held his gaze. "You read it," he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. Harry did not lower his wand. Draco appeared to have made a prior decision to regard this as irrelevant, and had committed to it. "The owl was clean?" she asked. "New bird purchased in a Muggle market in Bristol 2 weeks ago. Never used for anything, no trace." He was looking at the document in her hands. The relay birds were compromised as of October 3rd. Caro spotted the Edinburgh connection. "I burned the relay architecture on both ends before they could trace it back. The Edinburgh address, gone. The London box was emptied and closed in September. Were dark on all existing channels." He said this the way a person states the changed conditions of an operation, without effect, with the expectation that the listener would update their model and move forward. "The owl is the only thing that isn't traceable. It'll work twice more before I replace it." Ron said, "Why should we trust any of this?" Draco looked at him. It was not the contemptuous look. It was something more exhausted than that. Something that had traveled past contempt and arrived at a place where contempt required more energy than was available. "The blood vow on my palm is bound to her survival," he said. "If I deliberately give you false intelligence that results in her death, the vow's consequence is mine. Check the magical signature if you need verification. Use the binding magic text I sent Hermione in July. It explains the mechanics in sufficient detail." He looked at the document on the table. "I've been doing this for 2 years. The Ministry infiltration list I gave her in August 1995 was accurate. The Umbridge patrol schedules were accurate. Every item in every package through the relay was accurate, and none of it was traceable back to her. I haven't asked for anything." He paused. "I'm still not asking." Ron had no response to this. He sat back. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at the document. Harry had not lowered his wand. "Your blood is on this document," Hermione said. She was holding the protocol with both hands, reading it again with the specific attention she applied to legal instruments, following each clause to its consequence, checking the internal logic, identifying the points at which the mechanism could fail. She had been doing this for 7 minutes, aware of Draco sitting across the table and Harry standing at the tent's edge, with his hand still on his wand, and Ron sitting with his arms folded looking at the floor. "Yes," Draco said. "If someone at Gringotts checks the seal, if the goblins run a blood source verification on the protocol, then someone will know I extended Malfoy-affiliated access to 3 named individuals for the purpose of estate research in the Lestrange archive." He said it the way she had known he would say it, not dismissively, with the full weight of what it meant, sitting in the sentence without being underlined. "Yes." She looked up. "That's your life," she said. The tent was very quiet. Outside, the forest made its indifferent sounds, wind in the upper branches, something moving at a distance, the low creak of old wood contracting in cold air. "I know what I'm doing," he said. He was looking at her with gray eyes that were the same gray they had always been, the same gray as the conservatory light in a Wiltshire morning, and she was aware, with a clarity that she had been developing incrementally for 2 years, and had not fully named until this specific moment, that the architecture of distance she had been maintaining was not structural. It had never been structural. It had been a decision, and the decision was becoming harder to sustain in proportion to how clearly she could see what the decision was costing him. "The protocol gives us a legal framework for Gringotts," she said. Her voice was level. She had practice making her voice level. "The goblins honor old law over ministry statute. This shifts the entire operation from a break-in to a gray area access claim." "Yes," Draco said. "We'll need Griffhook. The protocol names no specific goblin intermediary. Any goblin with vault corridor clearance can action it. She nodded. She turned the document to Harry, who had finally, in the last few minutes, lowered his wand to his side, not holstered, but no longer aimed. She watched him read the protocol, watched his face move through the stages she had mapped over 7 years. The initial resistance, the structural assessment, the specific moment when Harry Potter accepted that a thing was true and reorganized everything else around it. The cup is in the Lestrange vault, he said. 3rd shelf, north wall, she confirmed. Behind the silver. He looked at Draco. Draco looked back. The ring you knew about, Harry said. The Gaunt ring. My genealogical text has the full Black Gaunt family tree. The acquisition date of the stone matches the period between Riddle's time at Hogwarts and his first disappearance. Cross-referenced with what I know about the other objects. How many do you think there are? A pause. The question had an answer that Draco had arrived at on his own, in the Malfoy study over a summer of reading documents that described what the Dark Lord had done to himself in the name of never dying. And the answer sat in the room between them with the specific gravity of something no one had said aloud before. 7, Draco said. Or he intended 7. Whether he completed the sequence, he stopped. Something shifted in his expression. There's a possibility I haven't been able to confirm. There's an object I believe he may have used that neither of you would have considered. I need more time before I name it. Harry looked at him for a long moment. How long? A month, maybe less. Harry looked at Hermione. She gave him nothing. No permission, no confirmation, just her own assessment returned to him, which was the way they had always communicated the things that didn't fit in words. He looked back at Draco. A month, he said. Draco nodded once. Harry finally holstered his wand. Across the tent, Ron was watching Hermione explain the vault corridor map in low, precise tones, and Draco was leaning forward to point at the 12-second window annotation. And their voices were close and efficient and completely unself-conscious, the way two people's voices got when they had been thinking in the same direction for long enough that the distance between the thoughts had closed. Ron looked at Harry. Harry said quietly, "She chose herself. He happened to be the right instrument." Ron was quiet for a moment. "Does she know that?" he said. Harry watched Hermione trace the vault corridor with her finger, and Draco followed the line of it with his eyes. "I think," Harry said, "she's starting to." They were dragged through the manor's front doors at 9 in the evening, which Draco knew because the long case clock in the entrance hall had been in the same position since his grandfather's time, and he had been measuring his life against it for 17 years. He heard them before he saw them. He was in the first-floor corridor, the one that ran above the entrance hall, carrying the spell sword back to the dueling chamber after 2 hours of practice that had left his wrist aching and his focus cleaner than it had been all week. He heard the doors open with the specific force of people being shoved through them rather than walking. He heard his father's voice dropping to the precise register it used when the situation required that nothing be visible on the surface. He heard Greyback, that particular laugh, the one that had nothing of humor in it. He was at the top of the stairs when they were brought into the entrance hall below. 3 of them, hands bound, faces he would have recognized anywhere. Which was the problem? Which had always been the problem? Which was the specific crack in everything his father had built. Draco Malfoy had spent 7 years measuring himself against these 3 people in particular, and the consequence was that he knew them better than he knew most members of his own house. Harry's face was swollen, a stinging jinx, badly aimed, that had caught him across the jaw and distorted his features enough to create a question. Greyback was already looking up at Lucius with the expression of someone presenting a prize, saying the name, saying Harry Potter, with the certainty of a man who had spent months being promised a significant reward. Lucius was looking at Harry. Then Lucius looked up at Draco. Draco came down the stairs. The drawing room filled quickly. The Snatchers and Greyback arranged the prisoners against the far wall, Harry and Ron flanking Griphook, Hermione between them, with the casual violence of people who had stopped distinguishing between the handling of objects and the handling of persons. Bellatrix arrived from the east corridor 7 minutes after the initial commotion, still wearing outdoor robes, her eyes moving over the room with the rapid inventory of a person who evaluated every situation in terms of what could be extracted from it. She looked at Harry for a long time. She looked at Hermione. "Search her," she said. 2 of the Snatchers moved forward. Hermione's bag was taken, upended onto the side table, its contents spilling out in the order that her organization had established, and that Draco had learned to read from across a library table. Notebooks first, then the reference texts, then the smaller items at the bottom. He watched the bag empty without moving. He was standing to the left of the fireplace, the spell sword held at his side in the loose grip of someone who had been holding it for 2 hours and had not yet been given a reason to let go. He had been in this position since coming down the stairs, and no one had asked him to do anything yet, which was its own kind of information. He watched Bellatrix's hands move through the contents of Hermione's bag. He watched Hermione watching Bellatrix, and the specific quality of Hermione's stillness, not the stillness of someone who had accepted the situation, the stillness of someone who had assessed it and was waiting for the variable to change. The sword of Gryffindor. Bellatrix found it at the bottom of the bag, and her stillness became something different entirely, something that narrowed, focused, turned the room colder by a degree that had nothing to do with temperature. "This is impossible," Bellatrix said, to no one in particular, the voice she used when she was working something out and the working was not going the way she needed it to. This was destroyed. This was supposed to be. She turned to Hermione. "Where did you get this?" Draco already knew what was coming. He had known from the moment Bellatrix picked up the sword. He had watched his aunt for 17 years, and he understood her the way you understood a force of nature. Not with sympathy, not with fear exactly, but with the complete comprehension of a person who had been educated by proximity in what that force did to things that were in its path. She did not ask questions to gather information. She asked questions to establish the right to do what she had already decided to do. Hermione said nothing. Bellatrix raised her wand. Draco had a specific thought, in the half-second before the curse was spoken. A thought that was not a decision exactly, because decisions required deliberation, and this did not. It was more like the completion of a sentence that had been building since July of 1995, since a knife and a genealogical text, and a name written in blood on parchment, in a room that smelled of old leather, and certainty. The sentence had been building for 3 years, and its last word was this moment, and the only question that had ever been relevant was whether he would say it when it arrived. He would. Bellatrix cast the Cruciatus. The sound was Hermione's, a sound that the blood vow had been delivering to Draco in its attenuated form for 2 years. A sound he had felt as pressure and cold, and the specific sensation of something going wrong in a way he had no ability to prevent. And he was already moving. He raised the spell sword. He pointed it across the room at Bellatrix. He fired the counter-curse. The Cruciatus broke. The specific quality of its breaking was not like a shield cracking or a spell deflecting. It was more fundamental than that. The way a frequency canceled rather than blocked, the opposing magic flooding the curse's architecture and collapsing it from the inside. Bellatrix's wand arm jerked. Hermione dropped to one knee, catching herself, and then she was upright again, breathing through her teeth, and the room was completely and absolutely still. No one moved. No one had moved since the counter-curse fired, because the counter-curse had come from the wrong direction, from the wrong person, from a direction that the room had not been accounting for. Draco, Lucius said his name once. Only once. The voice was one Draco had never heard from him. Not the cool management voice, not the performance voice, not the voice that Lucius used for the Wizengamot, or for Voldemort, or for the drawing room full of people who needed to understand the scale of the Malfoy family's importance. This was a voice that had had something removed from it. It was his father's voice with the certainty taken out, and what was left was the structure of a man who had just understood something that rewrote the architecture of 3 years. Narcissa was standing at the edge of the room near the east door. She was the only person in the room who was not looking at Draco. She was looking at the door. Bellatrix turned, slowly. The word was imprecise. There was nothing slow about Bellatrix. There was only controlled, and this was controlled in the way of something that was keeping itself contained at the boundary of its own capacity to contain. She turned to face Draco with an expression that had stripped itself down to a single question. "What did you do?" she said. Not a question. An accounting. A ledger entry being recorded. "I stopped you hurting her," Draco said. His voice was level. He had not lowered the spell sword. Bellatrix looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Hermione, still on her feet against the far wall. Then she looked back at Draco with the expression of someone assembling a picture that was worse than any individual piece had suggested. "She is a mudblood, Draco," Bellatrix said, very slowly. Each word separated from the next by enough space that there could be no mistake about which word she was placing weight on. Draco looked at her. He had his father's voice. He had had it since approximately the age of 12, the particular timbre of it, the aristocratic certainty that came from generations of people who had never needed to raise their volume, because volume was for people who were not certain of being heard. He had spent 17 years using that voice to say things his father would have recognized and approved of. He used it now. "She is under Malfoy family protection," he said. "In front of this family, in this house, by the magic of this estate, touch her again, and you answer to me." The room held its breath. Greyback in the corner had gone very still. The Snatchers had gone very still. Wormtail, near the door to the corridor, had performed his particular vanishing act of making himself as small and uninvolved as possible, which Draco noted and filed away. Lucius had gone white. Not the whiteness of anger. Draco knew that whiteness had grown up reading its variations. This was the whiteness of a man who had just had the structural plan of his family's survival revised without his input. In his own house, in front of witnesses he could not remove. Lucius understood, faster than anyone else in the room, exactly what the invocation of the right of family defense meant in terms of the chessboard he had been managing for the past 3 years. His son had just put the Malfoy name between Bellatrix Lestrange and a Muggle-born girl, and done it in language that predated the Ministry and predated Voldemort's authority, and was embedded in blood law that even the Dark Lord had never formally dismantled. If Voldemort heard of this, the Malfoys were dead. If Voldemort did not hear of this, which required every person in this room to hold the silence, then the Malfoy family had, in the presence of every Death Eater currently assembled in their drawing room, formally extended ancient family protections to someone those protections were designed to exclude. Every power structure in the room knew it, and not one of them could say it out loud without the kind of accounting that none of them were equipped to survive. Bellatrix stood very still. Draco watched her make the calculation. He watched her move through the stages of it, the rage, the assessment, the specific moment when her intelligence overrode the rage, because her intelligence was, underneath everything, the most dangerous thing about her. She could not override the right of family defense without Voldemort's direct intervention. She could not invoke Voldemort without explaining why she needed him. She could not explain why she needed him without saying what Draco had done. She could not say what Draco had done without the political consequences cascading in every direction at once. She could not touch Hermione Granger tonight. Bellatrix took one step back. It was not a retreat. Bellatrix did not retreat. It was a tactical repositioning that preserved her options while acknowledging a constraint she had not anticipated. And it cost her something that was visible in every line of her face, even as her face showed nothing. She moved toward the side door. "We're not finished," she said. "Not to Draco. To the room. To the situation. To the structural problem of a Malfoy who had burned his own floor to keep someone else from falling through it." Then she was gone. The chaos came quickly after that. It came in the form of a small figure in the entrance hall, a crack of apparition that was wrong in a way that violated the manor's wards, which meant something ancient had overridden something modern, which meant, Draco processed this in approximately 1 second, that someone had invoked a prior claim on the magic of this house, an older claim than the wards, and the wards had yielded to it. Dobby. He heard his father shout. He heard the Snatchers move. He turned to watch the drawing room entrance, and saw from across the room Hermione being pulled toward the apparition point, the small figure hauling at her arm with the strength of something much larger than it appeared, Harry and Ron already moving the chaos of the room reorganizing itself around an exit that no one in it had planned for. She was almost at the door when she turned. She looked across the room at him, not at the spell sword, not at Bellatrix's retreating back, not at the ring of Death Eaters now recalibrating toward the new threat, at him. She crossed the distance in 3 steps and pressed her hand, flat-palmed, against his left forearm. The arm with the glamour seal, the arm that should have had a dark mark and did not, and never had. And she pressed against exactly that spot, exactly that absence. For 1 full second, her fingers against the place where the mark should have been burning, and was not. He looked at her, 1 full second. Then Dobby pulled her through the door and she was gone, and the crack of apparition was the last thing. And then the drawing room was full of the aftermath of something that had happened too fast to fully register, and Draco was standing at the fireplace with the spell sword at his side, and his father staring at him from across the room, with the expression of a man trying to understand how long he had been wrong about what he thought he knew. Draco did not move. He pressed his left palm flat against the fireplace mantel. Cold stone. His hand against it the same way it had been against train glass and corridor walls, and the table in the library and every surface that had ever been the only available answer to the question of whether she was still there. The blood vow was warm in his palm. Warm as a hearth fire. Warm as a door that had closed and held for 3 years. Warm as the specific pressure of a hand pressed against an unmarked arm for 1 second in a drawing room in Wiltshire. She was alive. He let out one breath. Then he turned to face his father. Shell Cottage smelled of salt and wood smoke, and the particular damp of a building that had been built close enough to the sea that the sea had an opinion about its walls. Hermione had been there for 4 days. She had counted them by the quality of the light through the small window above the bed she had been assigned. Not a real bed, a camp bed, the kind of object that communicated temporary without apology. And by the meals Fleur brought with the specific efficiency of someone who expressed care through logistics, rather than sentiment, which was a quality Hermione found more comforting than she would have expected. She slept badly. She read when she could not sleep. She sat with Harry in the evenings while he stared at the fire and she stared at her notebooks, both of them keeping company with their own silences in the way they had learned to do across 7 years of situations that were too large for conversation. The blank parchment arrived on the 4th evening. It came through the small kitchen window, carried by a bird she had never seen before, a different bird again, which told her the relay architecture had changed again, which told her the old channels were gone. The parchment was folded once, sealed with plain wax, her name on the outside in handwriting she would have recognized in complete darkness. She took it to the window. She held it over the candle flame, not close enough to burn, close enough for the heat to reach the surface. The gray magic ink developed slowly, not the way standard invisible ink appeared all at once in a rush, but the way the Malfoy archive material always appeared, word by word, in the order it had been written, as though it was being transcribed again in real time by the same hand that had first set it down. "I've given you something you can't return. Don't try. Stay invisible. I'll find you at Hogwarts." She read it twice. Then she set the parchment on the windowsill and stood very still with the candle in her hand and understood, with the absolute clarity that had always been her most reliable and sometimes most inconvenient faculty, exactly what he had done. The tracking exclusion ward was in Section 4 of the Malfoy archive volume she had been transcribing since year 5. She knew it the way she knew the contents of every text she had spent time with. Completely, structurally. The specific weight of each clause sitting in her memory in its proper place. She knew what it did, and she knew how it worked, and she knew therefore what divesting it required. It was not a reversible process. The archive text had been unambiguous on this point. She had noted it in the margins when she first read it. The word permanent, underlined twice in her own hand, filed under the category of things she understood and hoped would never be relevant. The Blood Ward sacrifice redirected a Malfoy family member's inherited protection to a named recipient. Permanently. Irreversibly. The person who sacrificed it lost the ward entirely. Could not reclaim it, could not have it restored. The ancient magic that had made Draco Malfoy untrackable since the day he was born, the protection he had received, not by earning it, but by existing. The protection that had been encoded into the estate's magic before his grandfather's grandfather could have anticipated a world in which it would matter, was gone. He had given it to her. She stood at the cottage window with the candle burning low in her hand, and she looked at the decoded message on the parchment, and she felt, for the first time in 3 years of filing things under complications and increasing and active monitoring, the specific sensation of a categorization system failing. She put the candle down. She put the parchment down beside it. She went to where Harry was sitting by the fire. She sat in the chair across from him. He did not look up immediately. He was doing the thing he did when the fire was the only thing he could manage, which was stare at it with the full weight of everything he was carrying distributed across his expression, in the way it got when he had stopped trying to manage how much he showed. Then he looked at her. She said, "He gave up his inheritance protection for me." Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the fire. He did not ask what she meant. He did not ask how she knew. He was already nodding in the slight, inevitable way of someone receiving information that completed a pattern they had been watching build for longer than they had wanted to admit. "He's been doing this," she said. "All of it, since year 4. Since the train he has been—" She stopped. The sentence had several possible endings, and none of them were the right shape for what she was trying to say. "Yeah," Harry said. Carefully, She looked at the fire. Outside, she could hear the sea, the consistent, indifferent sound of water that had been moving against that particular stretch of coast since before the cottage was built, and would be moving against it long after, uninterested in the question of what was happening inside. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. Harry was quiet for a moment. He had the expression he got when he was going to say something true and had decided that saying it simply was the only way it would land correctly. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. "You just have to know it's real." She looked at him. He was still watching the fire. She sat with that for a long time. She was on the beach when he arrived. She had gone out after midnight because the cottage walls had the specific quality of containment that became suffocating after a certain number of hours. And the beach had no walls, and the sea at this hour was the color of something that had decided not to be any particular color, and was the better for it. She heard him before she saw him. Not the sound of footsteps, he moved too quietly for that, but the sound of breathing that was slightly wrong, the careful quality of someone managing pain through the mechanism of controlled inhalation. She turned. He was standing at the top of the shingle where the beach began, wearing the same muggle coat she had last seen him in at the Forest of Dean. His lip was split at the left corner, the kind of clean split that came from a curse rather than a fist. He was holding his right arm slightly away from his body, and his left arm was bare at the wrist, the sleeve pushed up, the glamour seal gone. She looked at it. The skin was clean, unmarked. The pale inner forearm of a 17-year-old that should have had the dark mark burned into it, and did not, had never had it, had carried for 18 months the perfect illusion of having it while underneath. Nothing, just skin. Just the choice he had made the night before the ceremony in his mother's room, preserved intact through everything. He came down the shingle and stopped 3 feet from her. He held up his left arm. She looked at the unmarked skin. She looked at the silver scar on his open palm. She looked at his face, which was carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who had been sustaining a performance for a very long time and had just put it down, not because they had chosen to, but because the infrastructure that held it up was gone. "How long," she said, "since the summer after year 4, the blood vow?" Yes. She looked at the scar, the silver-white line across his palm, the one she had first seen in the restricted section library by lamplight, the one she had filed under the permanent kind and had been cross-referencing against the Malfoy archive ever since, building the picture piece by piece until the picture was complete and undeniable, and she had kept looking at it anyway because looking at it meant acknowledging what it meant. "Does it hurt?" she said. "Only when you do." The sea moved. The shingle shifted under the water's edge, with the small grinding sound of 10,000 stones finding their arrangement for the night. The sky above the water was the deep blue that preceded black, the hour she had come to associate with significant things being said that could not be said in daylight. "I've read about blood vow mechanics," she said. Her voice was the voice she used when she was using information as scaffolding, because the actual thing she was trying to say required something structural to hold it up. The caster experiences a version of what the named person experiences: pain, fear, danger. It bleeds through the bond. "Yes, you've been feeling everything that's happened to me." He said nothing. She was calculating. She could not help it. It was the way her mind worked, the way it had always worked, assembling the timeline and populating it with new information, and following the implications to their conclusion. Year 5, and the blood quill, which she had never told him about directly, but which the vow would have registered through her. The moment in the forest when the Snatchers found them, and she had been genuinely afraid for the first time in a way that was not about the mission, but about being caught without warning. The Cruciatus in the drawing room, 4 days ago. Year 5, she said. Umbridge. The Cruciatus at the manor. A pause. "You felt all of it," he said, very quietly, every time. She looked at him for a long time. The split lip, the careful way he was holding his right arm, the unmarked forearm, pale in the dark, carrying the absence of something that everyone who knew him believed was there. She thought about 3 years of intelligence packages arriving through a relay he had built alone in a Muggle post office. She thought about a rite of family interference scroll prepared with his mother's annotations and delivered outside Umbridge's door. She thought about a protocol document with his blood pressed into the seal, handed across a table in a forest tent to a boy whose wand had been pointed at his chest the entire time. She thought, "I checked everything you sent me over the summer, every single item. It was all accurate." She thought, I trust your research. That doesn't mean I trust you. She thought. I know the difference. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know. The words came out without the scaffolding, without the structure she had been reaching for, without the intellectual framing she used for things that required framing. They came out the way things came out when you had stopped having the resources to protect yourself from your own sincerity. I didn't tell you. He looked at the water. I didn't want you to. He stopped. The stopped sentence had a shape she could identify, the shape of something that had been considered and discarded and reconsidered and discarded again. Across 3 years, in private rooms, she had never been in. I didn't want it to be an obligation for you. The vow obligates me. That was my choice. It shouldn't reach you. She looked at his left arm. The clean skin, the scar on his palm. I don't feel obligated, she said. The space after the sentence was very quiet. Neither of them filled it. The sea moved against the shingle, and the sky held its color, and the cottage behind them glowed with the light of other people's warmth. And the space where the sentence had ended stayed open between them. Not empty, the opposite of empty, full of the specific weight of something that both of them understood, and neither of them said. Because saying it required a form of courage that was different from every other kind of courage either of them had spent 3 years practicing. It was enough, for now, to know it was real. Draco lowered his arm. He sat down on the shingle beside her. Not close, not far the distance of two people who had established proximity without having established what proximity meant. And he looked at the water, and she looked at the water, and the sea continued its indifferent work against the Cornish coast. As though the question of what would be said next was the least interesting thing currently happening in the world. She supposed, from the sea's perspective, it probably was. She sat with him until the sky began to change. He came through the Hog's Head at 9:20 in the evening, while the mountain goats outside made their specific commentary on the night, and the bar smelled of something that had been fermenting since before Draco was born. Aberforth looked at him once from behind the counter, said nothing, tilted his head toward the portrait on the back wall, which was already open. Draco went through. The passage was low and cold and long, and he moved through it at the pace of someone who had been running on insufficient sleep and controlled urgency for 4 days, and had made a prior decision not to let either of those things show in how he walked. The spell sword was wrapped in cloth against his back. His shoulder still carried the curse bruise from the manor, deep purple beneath his shirt, the kind that would take 2 weeks to fully resolve, and that he had chosen to regard as informational rather than incapacitating. At the end of the passage was the Room of Requirement, which had been a great many things across the school year and was currently a refuge, warm, overpopulated, smelling of unwashed clothing and anxiety and the specific combustible energy of 200 students who had been living inside a resistance for 9 months. He came up through the floor. The room went very still. He stood there in the silence of 200 people recognizing him, and not knowing what to do with that recognition, the same paralysis he had been reading on faces since year 5, the specific suspension of people who had filed him under one category and were now being asked to revise the filing in real time. He looked at the room. I don't need you to trust me, he said. His voice carried. He had his father's voice. He had always had his father's voice. And he had spent 17 years watching it work in rooms, and he was going to use it now for the last thing his father would have chosen. I need the Slytherins who don't want to spend the rest of their lives explaining why they stood on the wrong side of this. If that's you, come with me. If it's not, stay here. Either way, I have work to do. Neville Longbottom was standing 6 feet away with his arms folded and an expression that communicated neither welcome nor refusal, which Draco had learned to read as Neville's version of active assessment. He met Draco's eyes. He nodded once. That was sufficient. 11 students stepped forward from the left side of the room. Not all of them were Slytherin. 2 were Ravenclaw. 1 was Hufflepuff, the kind of students who had somehow ended up on the wrong side of Umbridge's ledger and had been sheltering in the DA's network for most of the year. The Slytherin contingent was 9 strong. Zabini with his hands in his pockets and the expression of someone who had made a private calculation and arrived at a conclusion he found philosophically distasteful but practically sound. Daphne Greengrass. 4 fifth years whose names Draco had spent 2 years learning not as classmates, but as potential assets. 3 fourth years whose parents had signed their families into the Death Eater orbit out of fear rather than conviction. Not heroes. None of them were heroes. They were practical, strategic, and scared. And that was sufficient, "You're protecting the evacuation routes," Draco said. "Eastern staircase and the 7th floor corridor. Non-combatants only, you're holding the path clear, not engaging. If a Death Eater comes through, you delay and send a signal. Blue spark, left hand, high." He looked at them. "You're not dying for this. You're surviving it. There's a difference. Understand the difference." 9 heads nodded. They followed him into the castle. The battle began at the ramparts and moved inward over the first hour, like water finding the level of a damaged vessel, filling every corridor, every staircase, every courtyard, every entrance hall in turn. Draco moved through it with the cold channel focus that 3 years of sustained double-agent work had trained into him, reading the room, reading the perimeter, reading the specific pressure points where the castle's defensive positions were thinning. The Great Hall was the hub. Order members and students cycling through it, wounded being moved to the edges, the 4 house tables transformed from their purpose into something that had no peacetime equivalent. He was on the western flank, coordinating Zabini and Daphne on the corridor positions, when he heard the footsteps behind him with the specific cadence he had been measuring his childhood against. He turned. Lucius was flanked by 2 Death Eaters he recognized from the Manor's meeting rooms. Solid, experienced, the kind of men his father deployed when he wanted something done efficiently and without question. Lucius himself was in battle robes, his wand already drawn, his face carrying the expression he wore when he had arrived at a conclusion and was implementing it. The expression of a man who had spent 30 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered, and was not yet certain that this was a room where that would be different. "Draco," Lucius said, "come with me, now, before this goes further." Draco looked at his father. He had been preparing for this conversation for 3 years. Not in the way you prepared a speech, in the way you prepared for a load-bearing test, repeatedly from every possible angle, until you knew exactly which points would hold and which would require reinforcement. He knew every argument Lucius would make. He knew the love underneath the control, and the fear underneath the ideology, and the specific terror of a man who had built his entire life on the premise that blood determined value and was now watching his only son become evidence against that premise. "I can't do that," Draco said. "You don't have a choice. I've had a choice since the summer after year 4. A pause. "I just didn't tell you." Lucius looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his father's face. Something that was not the Malfoy performance, and was therefore something Draco had very little experience reading on him. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then Lucius raised his wand. Not the killing curse. Draco had known it would not be the killing curse. Lucius did not want him dead, which was the specific difficulty of dueling your father, that his objective was to immobilize rather than eliminate, and that gave him more options than Draco had. He blocked the first curse. He countered the second. The third drove him back 3 feet, and he felt it in the curse-bruised shoulder, with the specific sharp clarification of pain that the body provided when it wanted your attention. Lucius was better than him, had always been better than him, had been practicing offensive magic since before Draco could walk, and the gap between them was not something 3 years of spellsword practice had closed. Draco was not trying to win. He was trying to hold ground, to hold position, to stay on his feet long enough for the situation to change, which was a strategy he had learned from the relay and the inquisitorial squad, and every moment of the past 3 years. He held ground. He was losing it incrementally, step by step, the western flank narrowing around him, when the silver-white light came. It came from no specific direction. It was not a spell, not a charm, not anything that could be aimed or deflected. It was a burst of light at the temperature of something that had made a permanent decision, spreading from the air around him outward, flooding the space between him and his father's wand for 1 full second. It had the specific quality of the blood vow's warmth when it was working, when the bond between them was registering something at the other end and responding. Hermione, somewhere in this castle, had felt him in danger. The light broke Lucius's concentration, not dramatically, just enough. A flinch. An adjustment. A half-second of recalibration. A figure stepped between them. Narcissa had come through the castle's eastern entrance at some point in the battle's 2nd hour, and Draco had not known she was here, and he filed the question of how she had arrived and by what decision for later. Because she was here now, and she was standing between him and his father's wand, with her back to Draco, and her face toward Lucius, and the specific quality of her stillness that meant she had made a calculation, and the calculation was finished. "Enough," she said. "Narcissa." Lucius's voice had something in it that Draco had not heard from his father when speaking to his mother. A fissure, a small one, the sound of something that had been load-bearing for 30 years, and had just been asked to bear too much. "He is our son," Narcissa said. Her voice was the voice she used in the conservatory, the voice that was not performing anything. Our son. Not his soldier, not his symbol. Ours. She did not turn around. Go. Draco went. He did not look back. He heard his father say his mother's name again behind him. Once. The same way you said the name of something you did not want to lose. And then he was through the great hall's western door, and into the corridor beyond, and the sound of the battle folded back around him. Harry found him near the courtyard entrance at midnight. The battle had entered the suspended quality of its worst hour. The Death Eater perimeter had tightened, the castle's defenders were conserving, and somewhere in the forest, Voldemort was doing something that had made every magical creature within 2 miles go silent. Draco was standing with his back to the wall, the spell sword at his side, the Slytherin contingent positioned along the corridor behind him. His shoulder was bleeding through his shirt. A curse had caught him obliquely on the battlement 20 minutes ago. He had decided it was not a priority. Harry came around the corner at speed, and stopped when he saw Draco, and then did not stop, came the remaining distance, and positioned himself beside him against the wall, which was the particular geometry of people who had arrived at the same side of a fight and were using the same piece of cover. "He's going to call the ceasefire," Harry said. He meant Voldemort. He said it the way he said things he had already accepted, the way he said everything he had already accepted, which was with the specific flatness of someone who had been making peace with difficult facts since he was 11. "He's going to announce he's won. He's going to ask for me." Draco looked at him. "You're going," he said. "Yes. You know what the forest means." "Yes." Harry's jaw was set. His glasses were cracked at the left lens. He was looking at the corridor ahead, not at Draco. The way he looked at things he needed to see clearly, and could not afford to see the way they actually were. "I have what I need. The Horcrux mechanics, your information, the Lestrange vault, it all mapped. There's one left." He paused. "It's in me. Has been since I was a baby." Draco went very still. "I know how to finish it," Harry said, "without dying, or not entirely dying." He said this with the specific tone of someone who found the distinction technically necessary, even if experientially unclear. "I need you to hold position. Hold the Slytherin contingent. Hold the flanks. If it works, I come back. If it doesn't, if he kills you," Draco said, "I can't protect her." Harry was quiet for a moment. "He won't," he said. "How do you know?" "Because I'm not fighting him." Harry pushed off the wall. He straightened his robes with the automatic gesture of someone who had been taught that composure was the last thing you gave up. "I'm surviving him." He went toward the forest. Draco stood in the corridor. The Slytherin contingent was holding position behind him, 9 students who had made a practical decision and were living inside it, and the castle was quiet in the specific way of things, waiting to see what the next thing would be. The blood vow was warm in his palm. He pressed his hand against the wall beside him. The cold stone, the same stone that had been absorbing this kind of pressure for 1,000 years. And he waited. He did not know if Harry would come back. He knew Hermione was alive. The vow was warm and specific and unambiguous on this point, the way it had been every time, since the first time, since July of 1995. In a room in Wiltshire, with a silver knife and a name written in blood, and the door closing somewhere in his chest, with the quiet certainty of something permanent. She was alive. He kept standing. Harry came back. He came back out of the forest and into the great hall, and Voldemort followed him, and the battle's final hour was the hour in which everything that had been building for 17 years resolved itself in the single, anticlimactic, utterly final way that things resolved when they were actually finished. Draco was on the western balcony. He had moved the contingent there 30 minutes before Harry's return. The high position gave the broadest sightlines, the best perimeter monitoring, the longest advance warning of Death Eater movement. He was looking down at the hall when Tom Riddle fell. Not dramatically, not operatically. He fell the way things fell when the structure holding them up was finally and completely gone. And the sound it made was the sound of an absence where something had been. Draco pressed his palm flat against the balcony railing. The blood vow flooded through him, warm, steady, the specific warmth that he had learned to read as her alive and safe and present in a room somewhere nearby. And it was fuller than it had ever been, the warmth of something that no longer needed to brace against the possibility of its opposite. Below him in the hall, Harry was surrounded by survivors. Ron was there, and Hermione, he could see her from the balcony, brown hair and school robes and the specific upright quality of her posture that she maintained even in the immediate aftermath of catastrophe. Because some things were structural. Harry said something. She laughed through her tears. Draco leaned on the balcony railing and watched her. He thought, I spent 3 years not letting myself look directly at what this was. He thought, I don't have to do that anymore. The hall below was loud with the specific sound of people who had survived something together. Not celebration exactly, not yet, but the sound of people taking inventory of who was still there and finding the answer sufficient. Outside, the May morning was arriving over the lake with the indifference of a world that had been turning through the entire night regardless of what was happening inside this castle, and would keep turning. And that was the point. Behind him, Zabini said, What do we do now? Draco looked at the hall below. He looked at the silver scar on his palm, catching the first morning light through the high windows. He said, We go down. He pushed off the railing. He went down to where the world was putting itself back together, and for the first time in 3 years, he walked toward it instead of around it. The Wisengamot hearings began in June and ran through August, which was the specific kind of institutional efficiency that the ministry managed when it needed to demonstrate that it was doing something before anyone asked too many questions about what it had been doing previously. Lucius's hearing lasted 2 days. The verdict took 11 minutes. Narcissa's hearing lasted 4 hours. The testimony that occupied most of it was her own, delivered in the precise, unhurried voice she used for things she had decided to say completely, covering the glamour seal ritual, the right of family interference scroll, the legal language she had drafted for a son who had been running a covert intelligence operation out of her house for 3 years, without her official knowledge and with her complete unofficial support. The Wisengamot accepted the mitigating circumstances, supervised probation. 2 years. She accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had calculated it was survivable and moved on. Draco's hearing was set for the 3rd week of August in the Wisengamot's main chamber, which held 200 members when fully occupied, and on this particular morning held 214 because the gallery was open to the public, and the public had opinions about what Draco Malfoy was, and had decided to bring those opinions in person. He sat in the chair at the chamber's center. The chair was not comfortable. It was designed to communicate the weight of the proceeding to the person occupying it, and it succeeded. He sat in it with his back straight and his hands in his lap, and the expression he had been building since the summer after year 4, not the performance expression, the actual one underneath, the one that communicated he had already run every version of this room and was prepared for all of them. The presiding member read the charges. Draco's advocate, a wizard named Greengrass, no relation to Daphne, who had been recommended by the goblins, and whose entire professional reputation was built on the precise application of pre-ministry legal frameworks, placed the first document on the central table. The first package, July 1995, a list of ministry officials, 11 names, with their projected positions and recruitment timelines. The order's verification record was attached. All 11 names confirmed, all 11 placements accurate, all 11 identified and neutralized as a direct result of the intelligence. The second package, August 1995, a Death Eater operational schedule for the first month of the school year, which had allowed the order to move 3 safe houses before the raids reached them. He kept going. 47 packages over 3 years, 47 items laid on the table in sequence, each one authenticated by the order's own records, each one corroborated by testimony from order members who had used the intelligence, each one representing a choice made in a house in Wiltshire, or a school corridor, or a Muggle post office in Holborn, by a 15-year-old boy who had not been asked to and had done it anyway. The blood vow mechanics were verified by the ministry's own curse breakers, who confirmed the scar's magical signature, its binding structure, its involuntary consequence clauses. The glamour seal was verified by a specialist from the Magical Law Enforcement's Artifact Division, who confirmed it had functioned exactly as described. The Vault Protocol was entered as evidence. The Gringotts operation was entered as evidence. The testimony of 9 Slytherin students who had held the evacuation corridors during the battle was entered as evidence. Then Greengrass placed the final document on the table. It was the Educational Decrees file, Umbridge's formal record of the right of family interference, filed in October 1995, cited under the pre-ministry legal framework, referencing the Malfoy estate's authority to extend noble family protections to a named individual outside the formal guardianship chain. In the official ministry record, for the first time, the name of the protected entity was read aloud into the Wisengamot chamber, Hermione Jean Granger. The chamber was very quiet after that. The presiding member called for the vote. The vote was not close. In the gallery, Hermione was sitting in the front row between Harry and Narcissa, which had required a specific and conscious decision on her part to arrange, because the symbolism of it was not something she had chosen unconsciously, and she wanted to be deliberate about the things she chose. Ron was on Harry's other side. He had been there since the doors opened. He had not said much this morning, which was Ron's way of communicating that he was taking the proceedings seriously, and which Hermione had always found more reassuring than his words. When the presiding member read the verdict, acquitted on all charges of Death Eater collaboration, formally recognized as a covert intelligence operative under conditions of extreme personal risk for a period of 3 years. Hermione's face showed nothing. This was not because she felt nothing. It was the opposite of because she felt nothing. It was because what she felt was too large and too specific for the available expressions, the kind of feeling that needed more resolution than a face could provide. That was made of 3 years of verified intelligence packages and relay messages and a right of family interference, delivered outside an office with a blood quill and a beach in Devon and a balcony above a great hall at dawn. She filed it under finally. She allowed herself, very briefly, to be glad. Beside her, Narcissa was looking at her son in the chair below, with the expression she had worn in the conservatory in August of 1995, when she had poured him tea without being asked. The expression of a woman who expressed the most significant things through the precise management of warmth, delivered without ceremony, as though warmth announced was a lesser kind. Draco looked up at the gallery. He found her immediately, which she noted. She gave him nothing from her expression. He gave her nothing from his. They looked at each other across the chamber for 2 seconds, in the way they had always communicated the things that didn't fit anywhere else, and then the chamber was moving around them, and the moment resolved into the noise of 200 people processing a verdict, and it was enough. 6 months after the battle, the Hogwarts library closed at 11. Hermione knew this because she had been counting on it. She was completing the independent study equivalent of her 7th year. The ministry had established a formal pathway for students displaced by Caro Year Hogwarts, and she had discovered over the previous 4 weeks that the restricted section after hours had the same quality it had always had, the patience of things that had been waiting to be understood for a very long time and had not given up. She had not been sleeping well. This was not new. She had not slept well since May, and she had made peace with it as a structural fact of the current period, which she had filed under active reconstruction and was managing accordingly. She pushed through the low iron gate at 11:30. He was at the far end of the table, the same position, back to the wall, the Malfoy text open in front of him. The lamp at the table's edge, throwing light in the same direction it had thrown it 2 years ago, when she had come in through this gate for an entirely different reason, and found him already there. He looked up when she came in. She sat down, not at the far end, in the middle, the distance of 2 people who had been in this room together before and had no need to re-establish the geometry of it. They looked at each other across the table. He had a cut above his left eye that was 3 weeks old, and healing badly, which was the consequence of a dark artifact evaluation that had gone imprecisely according to his most recent letter, and which she had formed an opinion about that she had not yet delivered. His hair was shorter than it had been at the battle. He looked, she thought, like someone who had been sleeping slightly better than she had, which was still not well, but was an improvement. "I'm writing a proposal," he said. "A new category of Hogwarts course. Advanced defensive magic, including the gray magic protocols from the Malfoy archive. Accessible to all students regardless of blood status." He paused. "I need a co-author. Someone with the academic credibility to get the Wisengamot Education Committee to take it seriously." She looked at him. "That's a terrible first date, Malfoy," she said. He laughed. She had heard him do many things with his face over 7 years. The smirk, the performance of amusement, the specific contempt-adjacent expression he used when someone had said something he found structurally insufficient. She had not heard him laugh. It was different from all of those. It was the sound of something that had stopped performing its category and was just being what it was. "I know," he said, "but it's honest. I'll co-author," she said, "on one condition. Name it." She looked at his left hand, resting on the table beside the open text. The silver scar, pale in the lamplight, the same temperature it had been since July of 1995. "Tell me what the blood vow feels like now," she said. He held up his palm. The scar caught the light. "Warm," he said. "Constantly. It used to register differently. There was a directional quality to it, a pressure when you were in danger, a specific kind of cold when something was wrong. Now, it's just—" He paused, looking for the precise word which she had always found was how you knew when someone was telling you the truth about something, rather than a version of it. "Warm, like a hearth fire that isn't responding to anything particular, just present. What does that mean for the vow mechanics?" she said. "According to the text." "According to the text," he said carefully, "it means the named person is no longer in danger." A pause. "But I think there's more than one reading." She looked at the scar. She looked at his face, the face that had worn contempt and performance, and fear and determination across 7 years, stripped down now in the restricted section's lamplight to something younger and more honest and more tired and more present than she had ever seen it. The face of someone who had stopped performing and was simply sitting in a room with her at 11:30, with an open text between them and a proposal that needed a co-author. She pulled her notes toward her. "We should start with the passive legilimency chapter," she said. "That's the most defensively critical and the most legally complex. If we establish that framework first, the rest of the curriculum architecture follows from it." "I agree," he said. He moved the Malfoy text to the middle of the table. They began. 2 years later, in May of 2000, the Reformed Wizarding Educational Standards Committee met at the ministry in a room that smelled of old wood and institutional ambition, and adopted by a margin of 31 votes to 4, a comprehensive curriculum reform that made defensive magic history and magical law mandatory components of Hogwarts education, for the first time accessible without blood status restrictions of any kind. The co-authors were listed in the official record: Hermione Jean Granger, Draco Lucius Malfoy. After the vote, the committee dispersed into the ministry corridor with the specific energy of people who had just done something that would outlast all of them, which was the best kind of energy a room could produce. Harry caught Draco's eye across the corridor and gave him the specific nod he had been developing since the Forest of Dean, the nod of someone who had kept a running tally for 3 years and had arrived at a final number and found it sufficient. Draco returned it. Ron shook his hand, briefly, firmly, in the manner of two people who had negotiated a respect that neither of them had expected and that both of them had decided was worth maintaining. Then Ron went to find Harry and they disappeared toward the lifts, arguing about something that Hermione didn't catch, in the easy way of people who had been arguing about things for their entire adult lives and found it comfortable. The corridor emptied. Draco took her hand. Not for the first time. They had been building this in the spaces between the public work, in the restricted section and the ministry consultation rooms, and the post-hearing evenings at Grimmauld Place that had started as debriefs and become something else entirely, in the specific incremental way of two people who were better at projects than declarations, but in public, officially, without the architecture of deniability. She looked down at their hands. His left hand, the silver scar visible at the base of his palm. Her right hand beside it. "You know everyone is going to have opinions about this," she said. "When have either of us cared about that?" "I care about evidence-based assessments," she said. "And what does the evidence say?" She looked at him. She thought about a compartment on a train and a name memorized before she consciously decided to. She thought about 47 relay packages arriving through channels he had built alone in a Muggle post office. She thought about a scroll with burgundy wax laid on Umbridge's desk. She thought about a library table at midnight and a scar in lamplight, and the word permanent. She thought about a beach in Devon and a sentence that had ended and not been filled and had not needed to be. She thought about a balcony in the great hall at dawn and a warm scar against a railing, and the long, patient work of 2 years building something from unconventional materials that was going to last. "The evidence is compelling," she said. "High praise. Don't push it, Malfoy." "Granger," he said. Not a taunt, not the edge of a slur performance it had been for 4 years before a train and a choice and a silver knife in July. Her name in his mouth the way it had sounded since he had learned to say it like it was worth something, which was, she now understood, approximately the summer after year 4, which was when most things had started, which was where most things had been building from all along. They walked down the ministry corridor. The Malfoy library was donated to the Wizarding Research Institute the following autumn, transferred in full under a deed of gift that had been prepared by the Gringotts legal team and reviewed by 3 separate Wizengamot legal specialists, and annotated in the margins in 2 different handwritings. The condition was single, specific, and attached in writing by the co-donors, full access to all students, regardless of blood status, house affiliation, or socioeconomic background. No exceptions. No tiered access. No restricted sub-collections. The entire archive, including the gray magic texts and the genealogical records, and the 412-page compendium with the memory transcription charm on page 4 and the blood vow ritual on page 10, open to anyone who wanted to understand it. The condition was approved. On the plaque at the archive entrance, the donors were listed in the order that Draco had specified to the plaque makers, which Hermione had not been consulted about until after the fact. Hermione Jean Granger and Draco Lucius Malfoy. She said, when she saw it, "My name is first." "Yes," he said. "You put my name first." "I did." "Why?" He looked at the plaque for a moment. "You were there first," he said. "That doesn't make sense as a criterion. I wasn't in your family's library. I'd never even been to the manor before year 7. "I know." She looked at him. "You were there first," he said again, simply in the voice he used for things that were true and did not require elaboration. "On the train, with the same sketch in your notebook. The same idea. You were already going where I was going before I'd finished deciding to go there." He paused. "You were there first. Your name is first. That's the criterion." She looked at the plaque. She looked at his name beside hers, the letters pressed into the bronze, with the permanence of things that had been decided and were not going to change. She did not file this under anything. Some things did not require a category. Some things were simply true, and had been true since a train in June, and a choice in July, and a silver scar that had been warm without interruption since the night a door closed somewhere in a boy's chest, and he let it. She took his hand. They went inside. "Let us know what you'd like to see next." The end.